Good morning. I think we have heard the analogy of OD with changing tires of a moving car, right? Culture building, being a function of OD, indeed can be very analogous to changing tires of a moving car. When we implement change, we always have to remember that we have to minimize, if not, we do not disrupt the operations. Okay? So this morning, allow me to share one way on how we at National University actually did that. Okay? So, let me introduce first my school, our school. National University. Alright. National University was founded by Don Mariano Fortunato Hoxon on August 1, 1900. In 2008, the SM Group of Companies acquired majority ownership of National University. And to date, we have 8 campuses. We have, of course, the main campus located at Sampaloc, Manila, the home of the Lady Bulldogs champion, 16-game sweep, UAAP season 84. We also have NU Nazareth School, NU Lipa, NU Dasmariñas, NU Laguna, NU Fairview, NU Baliwag, and now we have our newest campus in Clark, which will be opening by next academic year. Basically, NU also secured a QS 3-star rating. It assesses higher education institution based on its global standards and best practices. NU just celebrated its 122nd anniversary. Actually, this year we're celebrating it. And it is interesting to note that I have been with NU for 11 months, less than a year. In less than a year, I take pride on National University's trust on culture building and sustaining. And this morning, I would like to showcase one of its projects evidently on culture building and sustaining, the program on PATAS. Okay. PATAS is pagtugon sa tamang salaysay. This is a brainchild of human resource. PATAS is simply a platform that serves for online incident reporting. We aim to get truthful and responsible incident reporting on any employee cases. Okay? So PATAS came about when we were thinking of how we could have other avenues for our employees' feedbacks and concerns. So we thought of a term that could actually depict our current work environment, and that is PATAS. So PATAS, when an employee accesses PATAS, he will be asked on the preference for contacting the employee either by mobile or by MS Teams. Now, why do we have to do that? HR has to verify information. Aside from verification, we also have to make sure that we send updates, regular updates from the time of receipt of incident report, updates up to its completion, or when the IR has been resolved. So that is the role of HR in terms of PATAS. Okay? So how do we go about creating the PATAS? Allow me to share with you the 6 components of great corporate culture as defined by Harvard Business Review. This will be our discussion points while I'll showcase to you NU's feedback mechanism. To set our direction, we actually initiated the employee engagement survey, which I know in each company does, right? So when we had our employee engagement survey, after getting all the details, we did not stop there. we actually have several informal meetings with our staff, basically to gather all their insights and concerns and how they actually feel like releasing and addressing how we address their feedbacks and concerns, okay? So what we thought of, we also checked on our formal meetings during admin meeting and even dialogue meetings. And it actually validated that we have to have another means of feedback mechanism. Thus, the birth of PATAS. Okay? So we were guided by the core values of the school. There are 5. You have integrity, compassion, innovation, resilience, and patriotism. So once the employee scans the PATAS QR code, it will direct it to the MS forms. And that MS forms will be submitted to the admin, which is the HR. Now let's discuss about the activities and processes of PATAS. I told you earlier that this is just one of the feedback mechanisms that NU has. We have several, in fact. We have our Kampustahan. Kampustahan is our kapihan with the president. It is a series of discussions with the staff, the usual town hall meetings that you may have. That is our Kampustahan. So the president and I goes around all 8 campuses for the series of kapihan. We also formalize our labor management council, and that is also to give way to give also the idea that we are in fact partners of the regulatory bodies. And lastly, I'm happy to share with you as well that we actually have initiated our monthly President's Address. This is an online 30 to 1 hour online address of the President. What does he tackle? First, he talks about promotions or employee movements. We celebrate those items. He also mentions celebrations during Teachers' Day. And tomorrow, he's going to have his own President's Address on Christmas dahil hashtag Pasko na sa NU. We try to make sure that communication lines are open and accessible to everybody. And PATAS is just one of those feedback mechanisms, okay? So at this point, let me pause, and I want you to check and get your notepads and your ball pens. I want you to list down what are your current feedback mechanisms. What are those feedback mechanisms that you have in your offices, okay? Can you just go back? Check your notes, even your cell phones. You could use your notes in your cell phones. I want you to list down. I think this is the best way to evaluate and assess what are your feedback mechanisms for your staff. Maybe you could write 1 or 2 feedback mechanisms. Okay? Can you do that now? Let's just have a 1 or 2 minute, write it down and check how do you get feedbacks from your staff. You could use your cell phones. If I am an employee of your company, how could I raise my concern? What are the avenues that is being given to me or accessible for me to raise my concerns? Maybe you've written 1, 2, possibly more than 3. That's very good. But after that, check again what you've written. Can you cross out what you've written, the traditional? Number 1 is direct email notification. And number 2, the most common, an open door policy. When anybody could just show up in your office and talk to you. That's very traditional, right? So when you cross that out, those 2 items, ilan na lang po ang natira? I hope you still have 2 or 3 items left in your feedback mechanism. That is actually a way for us to assess what are the avenues for employees. And I hope that will be your takeaway. That's the first item that I want you to answer. What are the available feedback mechanisms for your employees? I highly support digitalization for HR process. And in fact, that is very evident with our patas. And you have to think ways on the limitations that we have for a face-to-face interaction to create that online access for our employees. Although GCs and Viber messages are very available and accessible to many, but please take note, those are still informal notices. You need to create formal ways for your employees. Also, for you to formally monitor what is happening. Alright? So the first one that you actually wrote are the items for feedback mechanism. The second one, which you don't need to write it down, but I hope you'll ponder on this question. How do you assess the effectiveness of those feedback mechanisms? Did you even have the opportunity to assess it? You have to think of ways on checking the effectiveness of any programs for that matter. Any HR programs has to be assessed after or during the program implementation. And I hope when you wrote down your feedback mechanism, you also identify how to assess it. Okay? That's a second. The third one is that enough? Do you think that what you've written are enough feedback mechanisms for your employees? That alone you could answer within your organization. There's no hard rule to have 1 or 2 or even 5 or maximum of 10 feedback mechanisms. For all you know, that won't be healthy for any organization. I think that becomes very distinctive for each of the organization already. Okay? So those are the 3 items that I would like to think after my talk, possibly, and take away when you go back to your respective offices. It has to be assessed. And speaking of that, I'll share with you how we assess it. Okay? Later on patas, but for Kampustahan, we assess it, of course, with our evaluation forms. We assess it, we monitor all the items that were raised during Kampustahan. We monitor it with timelines, and we actually set formal reports for Kampustahan. Okay? So, that is for Kampustahan. But for patas, I'll share it with you later. Okay? Now, let's discuss the people or the reinforcers. In any company-initiated programs, it has to be led and directed by the top. I think that's very basic and we all know that already. And who do we seek support from? No less than the President. In fact, the President was the one who announced PATAS as a program of National University. It was part of one of his President's addresses. And it creates some accountability, not just for HR, but also from the office of the President. So if you're going to create programs, I suggest you tap somebody from the management side to announce it on your behalf as part of HR program. Of course, HR will also be a very credible person to discuss the program for any company, but having the President announce it on our behalf, it creates that accountability and oneness for the program to prosper, right? So I suggest you tap your President or anybody from your management, okay? So let's discuss now the compelling stories. Now this is a fun story that we always discuss. When we were eyeing the patas, we were discussing how do we coin it? What should we term our online reporting? We have to term it as what we would like our work environment to be depicted, patas. right? But aside from that, we want it to be catchy. We want it to build and sustain interest. And for somebody who would actually report an incident, and he would have that idea that it's patas, it builds some confidence that the incident report will be addressed. Remember, it's termed patas, pagtugon sa tamang salaysay. Tamang salaysay is just the incident report. But we also call for action, and that is pagtugon. Now, what are the compelling stories? The compelling stories, it's just mere stories. We always talk about patas. In all meetings, in all discussions, in a general meeting that we may have, in a small meeting that we have, we talk about patas. And people could actually share their stories about patas. So when you talk about that project, it remains to everybody. Para ka nagmarites. Pero this time, it's all about the HR project or the culture that you want to build. Remember, if you don't talk about it, mawawala po siya. It will just slowly die. So you really have to build momentum and sustain the momentum in all aspects. Meetings, even emails. When you write your name, regards Aimee, there should be a link on patas. There should be some email reminders on patas. Okay? And those people who submitted patas, we ask them also to share their experience in patas. Those are the compelling stories. Let your employees be ambassadors of your HR projects. Let them speak on our behalf. So, making them do that, they have to have a buy-in with your product, with your program. So, paano sila magbabuy-in? If they believed the whole process. So, you have to deliver what you promised. Dapat tumugon ka. Dahil ang title, pagtugon sa tamang salaysay. Okay? And lastly, the shared space. I am proud to say that we have a very sophisticated system in National University that all patas is accessible to all 8 campuses. So anyone from those 8 campuses, once sent, HR will receive it. Meron kaming prompt that it will reply immediately. There's a prompt also for us to know if the timeline has been already set. So meron mga 3 days, 1 week, and all. So you have to create that system. Okay? I do agree that this time of age talaga, there are several new tasks for HR. Prior pandemic and now pandemic, there's an evolving new task for HR. And we do not need additional tasks, unnecessary stress, and thus we need to make sure we maximize our resources. Okay? So, shared space, basically that's the QR code, and make sure you have a very good IT system to help you. Your IT people to help you making those paper trails easy for access of HR. Remember, the credibility remains on the pagtugon. Okay? So when you do the feedback, this is a feedback mechanism. There's a hunger for employees to give their feedback. And they also require that feedback from our platform, the online incident reporting. Okay? I hope you can still follow because I'm on my last slide. Okay? Basically, patas, kampustahan, labor management council, and all other forms of feedback mechanisms are part of OD functions. It is culture building, and in culture building, always remember, we are the implementers of change. And when we do implement change, Part of it, we have to ensure that we do not disrupt operations. We maximize all our resources and we deliver what we promise. So in communication and culture, I leave it with you this one. Building the organization culture starts with communication. You have to communicate it. Make it a storyline. Everybody has to know. But for us to sustain it, we have to celebrate it. When we celebrate it, we have several, not necessarily parties when we celebrate. It's really more of people talking about it, making our employees being ambassadors of our HR programs. And bottom line, you have to take care of your employees. So again, good morning everyone and have a wonderful day ahead. Salamat po.